Commander Eric Harlow stood motionless on the bridge of the U.S. Vanguard. His eyes were fixed on a large view screen that showed nothing but darkness. But this wasn't normal space. This was something else. The darkness seemed to move, to breathe almost. This was where the Abyss fleet had just appeared from. "Commander, you need to see this," Lieutenant Commander Stephanie Wright said, her voice tight with worry. She handed him a tablet with the latest sensor readings. Eric took the tablet and studied the numbers. They made no sense. The energy signatures were unlike anything humans had ever recorded. He ran his hand through his short brown hair, a habit when he was worried. "How many ships are we looking at?" he asked. "At least 30 that we can detect," Stephanie replied. "But these readings suggest there could be more hiding in that void." The bridge was quiet. Everyone knew what this meant. The human fleet had already lost 3 major battles against the Abyss fleet in the past month. They were down to just 7 battleships, including the Vanguard, and a handful of support vessels. This might be humanity's last stand. "Contact Admiral Foster. Tell her we've confirmed Abyss fleet presence in Sector 7, Eric ordered. "And get me Kevin Powell from engineering." A moment later, Kevin's face appeared on a small screen near his command chair. Kevin's normally clean uniform was stained with oil, and dark circles showed under his eyes. He hadn't slept in 3 days. "Please tell me you have good news," Eric said. Kevin nodded. "The quantum field disruptor is at 87% completion. I need maybe 4 more hours." "We might not have 4 hours," Eric replied, looking back at the view screen where faint, ominous shapes were becoming visible in the darkness. "Do what you can. If this works like you think it will, it might be our only chance." Kevin nodded again, his face serious. "I understand, sir." Powell out. Eric turned to face his crew. 20 men and women looked back at him, waiting for orders. They were tired, scared, but they were also the best humanity had to offer. "The Abyss fleet is preparing to attack. We all know what that means," Eric said. "We've lost too many good people already, but we're still here. Earth is depending on us." He walked over to the tactical station where Officer Jason Miller was working. "What's our weapons status?" Eric asked. "Rail guns at full capacity. Missile bays 1 through 4 are loaded. 5 and 6 were damaged in the last battle," Jason replied. "Shields are at 60%. The best we can do with current power constraints." From across the bridge, Communications Officer Heather Davis spoke up. "Commander, I'm picking up a transmission from the U.S. Defiant. Captain Rodriguez reports they're in position behind the Titan moon. The U.S. Sentinel and U.S. Horizon are with them." "Good," Eric said. "Tell them to hold position until they receive the signal." Eric moved back to his chair and sat down. The plan was dangerous, but it was all they had. The Vanguard and 3 other ships would appear vulnerable, drawing the Abyss fleet into position. The rest of the human fleet, what they now called the Shadow Fleet, remained hidden, waiting to spring the trap. In engineering, Kevin Powell worked frantically. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he calibrated the quantum field disruptor. The device was smaller than he had expected, about the size of an old-fashioned microwave oven, but it hummed with incredible power. If his calculations were correct, it would target the unique energy signatures of the alien vessels, disrupting their power cores. If it worked, it might give humanity a fighting chance. If it failed, Kevin didn't allow himself to finish that thought. He adjusted another setting and checked the power flow. Back on the bridge, Eric watched as the first Abyss ship fully emerged from the darkness. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of the Vanguard, with a hull that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. 2 more followed, then 5 more. "All hands to battle stations," Eric ordered, his voice calm despite the fear in his chest. "This is not where humanity ends. Not today." The lights on the bridge dimmed as power was diverted to weapons and shields. The Abyss fleet moved forward, like predators stalking prey. The battle for humanity's survival was about to begin. The Shadow Fleet waited in silence. 5 human warships hid inside the purple clouds of the Orion Nebula. Their engines were running at minimum power. Their weapons were ready but cold. They'd waited for the signal. Admiral Diane Foster sat in her command chair on the bridge of the U.S. Relentless, the largest ship in the Shadow Fleet. She was a tall woman with short gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. Her fingers tapped lightly on the armrest as she watched the tactical display. "Any word from the Vanguard?" she asked. Communications Officer Peter Daniels shook his head. "No, ma'am. Commander Harlow is maintaining radio silence as planned." Diane nodded. The plan was risky, but they had no choice. Let the Vanguard and its support ships look vulnerable. Draw the Abyss Fleet into position. Then strike with everything they had left. "Admiral," said a voice from the science station, "you should see this." Intelligence Officer Nathan Blake was hunched over his console. His young face looked troubled in the blue light of the screen. "What is it, Blake?" Diane asked, walking over to him. "I've been analyzing the movement patterns of the Abyss Fleet from our previous encounters," he explained. "There's a pattern here. Look." He showed her a series of diagrams on his screen. The alien ships moved in complex formations, but there was something familiar about them. "They move like," Diane started. "Like a school of fish," Nathan finished for her. "They react as one, almost instantly. I think they're being controlled from a single command ship." Diane's eyes narrowed. "If we could identify that ship." "Exactly," Nathan said. "Take out the head, and the body falls." On the other side of the solar system, Lisa Monroe sat in a small, crowded room filled with communications equipment. She was on Earth, in what used to be an old military bunker in Colorado. Now it was the last major listening post for human forces. Lisa adjusted her headset and frowned. For 3 days, she had been monitoring alien communications. Most of it was just noise to human ears, but she had developed an ear for patterns. "That's strange," she whispered to herself. She played back the recording and filtered out some of the background noise. There it was again, a different pattern in the alien transmissions. She had never heard this before. Lisa quickly sent a message to her supervisor. "Possible division in alien communications. Some signals don't match the main frequency patterns. Request permission to investigate further." Back on the U.S. Relentless, Admiral Foster received an update from Earth. She read Lisa's report with interest. "Division within the Abyss Fleet," she said to Nathan. "Could be useful." "If it's true," Nathan replied cautiously, "it could also be a trap." The tactical officer, Carl Jenkins, called out from his station. "Admiral, the Abyss Fleet is moving. They're engaging the Vanguard and her support ships." Diane moved quickly back to her command chair. "Show me." The main screen lit up with a tactical display. The Vanguard and 3 other human ships were in formation near the Saturn defense perimeter. The much larger Abyss Fleet was moving toward them, spreading out in a classic pincer movement. "They're trying to surround them," Carl said. Diane watched closely. This was part of the plan. Let the Abyss Fleet think they had the advantage. Let them commit fully to the attack. "Weapons status?" she asked. "All ships report weapons hot and ready," Carl replied. "And the new quantum disruptors? Installed and online, but untested in combat conditions." Diane nodded. Those disruptors were their best hope, if they worked. They were designed to target the unique energy signatures of the alien vessels. "Prepare to move on my mark," she ordered. "All ships maintain nebula cover until signal is given." On her personal screen, Diane watched as the Vanguard fired its first salvo at the approaching Abyss ships. The battle had begun. "Hold steady," she said, more to herself than to her crew. "Just a little longer." The bridge was silent except for the soft beeping of equipment. Everyone knew what was at stake. This wasn't just another battle. This was possibly humanity's last chance. In the distance, Flashes of light marked where the Vanguard was fighting for its life against overwhelming odds. Diane's hand hovered over the signal button. "Not yet," she whispered. "Not yet." The Abyss fleet moved forward like a dark wave. Their ships were black and sleek, with no visible windows or markings. They looked more like living creatures than machines. The lead ship, twice the size of the others, fired first. A beam of purple energy shot across space toward the human destroyers. Science Officer Gregory Walsh watched the beam with horror from his station on the U.S. Vanguard. "That's not their normal weapon," he said to Commander Harlow. "The energy signature is different." On the view screen, they watched as the purple beam hit the space around 3 human destroyers. The ships didn't explode. Instead, the space around them began to warp and twist. "What's happening?" Commander Harlow demanded. Gregory's fingers flew over his console. "They're creating some kind of micro-singularities, like tiny black holes. They're trying to crush our ships with gravity." The 3 destroyers struggled against the warping space. Their engines glowed bright as they tried to escape, but they were being pulled inward. Captain Olivia Martinez commanded one of those ships, the U.S. Dauntless. She was young for a captain, only 38, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her ship groaned as the hull began to buckle under the immense gravitational pressure. "Damage report," she shouted over the sound of tearing metal. "Hull breaches on decks 3 through 7, her first officer replied. "Engines at maximum, but we're not breaking free. 2 minutes until complete structural failure." Olivia looked at the tactical display. The other 2 destroyers were in the same trap. Beyond them, she could see the Vanguard, still safe from the attack. An idea formed in her mind. "Plot a course directly into the weapon emitter on that lid ship," she ordered. Her first officer stared at her. "Captain, that's suicide." "This ship is lost anyway," Olivia said calmly. "We can save the others." While the Dauntless prepared for its final mission, another conversation was happening millions of miles away. Fleet Admiral Paul Jackson sat in his office on the lunar base. His weathered face showed the strain of 3 years of war. A communication officer rushed in. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission. It's from the aliens." Paul's head snapped up. "What?" "Put it through." The large screen on his wall flickered to life. The image showed a creature unlike anything humans had seen before. It had gray skin that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. Its eyes were large and completely black. Where a mouth should be, there was only a small opening that pulsed as it spoke. "I am the one you call the emissary," it said in perfect English. "I wish to speak with your leader." Paul stood up straight. "I am Fleet Admiral Paul Jackson of the Earth Defense Force." The alien's eyes seemed to study him. "Your ships fight bravely, but without purpose. This conflict can end today." "By your surrender?" Paul asked. "By discussion," the emissary replied. "I offer parley, a meeting between our kinds." In space, Captain Martinez's ship, the U.S. Dauntless, turned toward the alien weapon. Engines blazing at full power, the damaged destroyer accelerated. "All non-essential personnel to escape pods," Olivia ordered. "Launch when ready." Her first officer shook his head. "I'm staying with you, Captain." Olivia nodded once. Around them, the ship continued to break apart as the gravitational forces pulled at it. But they were moving now, pushing through the warped space toward the alien weapon. On the Vanguard, Commander Harlow watched the Dauntless with a mixture of pride and sadness. "What are they doing?" Stephanie asked beside him. "Saving us all," he replied softly. The Dauntless struck the alien weapon emitter at full speed. The resulting explosion was blinding. When the light faded, both the Dauntless and the alien weapon were gone. The space around the other 2 destroyers returned to normal. Back in his office, Admiral Jackson stared at the emissary's image. "You want to talk now, after 3 years of war?" "Circumstances change," the emissary replied. "Will you meet?" Before Paul could answer, a junior officer burst into the room. "Sir," The Dauntless just rammed an alien weapon. Captain Martins, she's gone, sir. But she saved 2 other ships. Paul closed his eyes briefly. Another hero lost. He looked back at the alien on the screen. Where and when do we meet? He asked. The neutral station hung in space like a small moon. It was an old mining facility that had been abandoned years ago. Now it served as the meeting place between humans and the aliens that had brought them to the edge of extinction. Admiral Paul Jackson's shuttle docked at the station with a soft clank. He was not alone. Richard Spencer, the head of the diplomatic corps, sat across from him. Richard was a thin man with glasses and a serious face. He believed that any conflict could be solved with words. "This could be our chance to end the war," Richard said, straightening his tie. Behind them sat Allison Carter, head of security. Her hand never strayed far from her gun. Unlike Richard, she did not trust the aliens. "Or it could be a trap," she said. "We should have brought more guards." Paul raised his hand to silence them both. "We follow the terms of the meeting. 2 diplomats, 2 security personnel. No more." The airlock hissed open. They stepped into the old station. The air smelled stale and the lights flickered. At the far end of a long corridor stood the emissary, flanked by 2 other aliens. While this meeting took place, a different scene unfolded in another part of space. A small group of Abyss fleet ships had broken away from the main battle. They moved silently, their engines modified to leave no trace. Their dark hulls blended with the blackness of space. These ships headed for Earth, specifically toward the orbital defense platforms that protected the planet. If they could destroy these defenses, the rest of the Abyss fleet could attack Earth directly. No one had noticed their departure except for one person. Marcus Bennett was a security officer on a small observation post near Jupiter. His job was to watch for any unusual movement. He noticed the strange readings on his screen. "That can't be right," he muttered to himself. He adjusted his instruments and looked again. Yes, something was moving out there. Something that didn't want to be seen. Marcus sent an urgent message to Fleet Command. "Possible stealth vessels detected moving toward Earth. Request verification." Back on the U.S. Vanguard, engineer Kevin Powell finally completed his work on the quantum field disruptor. His hands were dirty and his eyes red from lack of sleep, but he smiled as he closed the panel on the device. "It's ready," he said to his assistant. "Let's hope it works." He carried the device carefully to the bridge where Commander Harlow waited. "Will it work?" Harlow asked without preamble. "In theory, yes," Kevin replied. "It should disrupt their energy fields and shut down their ship's power systems. But what? We need to get close, really close." Commander Harlow frowned. Getting close to the Abyss ships was exactly what they had been trying to avoid. At the neutral station, Admiral Jackson stood face to face with the emissary. The alien was taller up close, nearly 7 feet, and had an unsettling grace in its movements. "Why now?" Jackson asked. "Why offer peace after all this destruction?" The emissary's black eyes revealed nothing. "Circumstances have changed. We seek resolution." Richard Spencer stepped forward eagerly. "We can discuss terms for an immediate ceasefire, perhaps begin talks about." "No," the emissary interrupted. "First, you must understand why we came to your system." Allison Carter's hand tightened on her weapon. Something felt wrong about this whole situation. At that moment, Marcus Bennett's warning reached the command center on Earth. The officer in charge immediately contacted the U.S. Vanguard. "Commander Harlow," the officer reported, "we have detected stealth vessels approaching Earth's defense grid. The meeting might be a diversion." Harlow's face hardened. He turned to his communications officer. "Contact Admiral Foster. Tell her to prepare the Shadow Fleet to move on my signal. They're trying to slip past us while we're distracted." In the hidden pocket of subspace that Marcus had detected, the commander of the alien stealth group prepared to attack. His ship was different from the others, smaller, faster, and more deadly. This was the true command ship, hidden all this time, directing the Abyss fleet from the shadows. Back on the Vanguard, Kevin Powell looked at the completed quantum disruptor. It had to work. If it didn't, Earth might not survive the day. The emissary's dark eyes seemed to look through Admiral Jackson rather than at him. The meeting room on the neutral station was cold and quiet, except for the soft hum of life support systems. "We did not come to your star system by choice," the emissary said. Richard Spencer leaned forward, his diplomatic training keeping his face neutral despite his surprise. "What do you mean?" The emissary moved its long, gray fingers in a pattern that might have been nervous or might have been meaningful. "We are running. Your kind thinks we are invaders. We are refugees." "Refugees don't destroy entire fleets," Allison Carter said sharply, her hand still near her weapon. "We needed a new home," the emissary continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Our home systems, 12 worlds, all gone now." "Gone?" Admiral Jackson asked. "How?" The emissary turned its head in an unnaturally smooth motion. "Something worse than us. Something that consumes. It found our worlds first. We escaped. We need a new home. Your Earth." The humans exchanged glances. Was this the truth or another trick? While this conversation happened, Tactical Officer Danielle Rivers on the U.S. Vanguard spotted movement on her screen. She was young but sharp-eyed, one of the best tactical officers in the fleet. "Commander Harlow," she called out, "I'm detecting unusual movement at coordinates 227 by 84. Matches the stealth signature reported by the observation post." Commander Harlow moved to her station and studied the screen. The stealth ships were moving fast toward Earth's orbital defenses. "How many?" he asked. "At least 7 ships," Danielle replied. "Small but powerful. They're trying to stay in Earth's sensor shadow." Harlow made his decision. "We can't wait any longer. Signal the Shadow Fleet. Now." In the Orion Nebula, Admiral Diane Foster received the message. She stood from her chair on the bridge of the U.S. Relentless. "Shadow Fleet, this is Admiral Foster. The time for hiding is over. Full power to engines and weapons. Move out." 5 massive warships emerged from the purple clouds of the nebula, engines blazing bright against the darkness of space. The U.S. Relentless led the way, followed by 4 other ships: the Intrepid, the Valiant, the Defiance, and the massive dreadnought U.S. Nemesis. On the Nemesis, Admiral Christopher Boyd watched the battlefield with cold eyes. He was older than most active admirals, with a completely bald head and a scar running down his left cheek. The Nemesis was the largest ship humans had ever built, a last resort that had been hidden away until now. "Bring us into attack position," Boyd ordered. "Prepare the main cannon." The information from the neutral station was transmitted to all human ships. The reason for the Abyss fleet's aggression was now clear: desperation. They weren't conquerors. They were running from something worse, something that had destroyed their homeworlds. This knowledge didn't change the immediate situation. The stealth ships were still heading for Earth's defenses. The main Abyss fleet was still attacking human ships. The war continued, even if the reasons for it were now more complicated. On the Vanguard, Kevin Powell installed the quantum disruptor into the ship's main weapons array. The device hummed with power, its blue light casting shadows in the darkened weapons bay. "Disruptor online," he reported to the bridge. "But Commander, I've been thinking about what the emissary said. If they're running from something else." "One problem at a time, Powell," Commander Harlow replied. "First, we save Earth." The Shadow Fleet moved into position, catching the main Abyss fleet by surprise. The human ships opened fire, their weapons lighting up the darkness of space. On his stolen observation post, the commander of the alien stealth fleet saw the human reinforcements arrive. He knew his mission was now in jeopardy. He made a decision. If he couldn't destroy Earth's defenses, he would use his ship's most powerful weapon, the one they had been saving. He gave the order. Deep within his ship, alien engineers began the process of activating what they called The Wrath of the Abyss, a weapon of last resort that could tear apart the fabric of space itself. The final phase of the battle was about to begin. The Shadow Fleet emerged from the nebula like avenging angels. Their weapons fired in perfect unison, striking the unprepared Abyss ships. The massive dreadnought U.S. Nemesis led the attack, its main cannon firing a beam of energy so bright it looked like a new star had been born. Admiral Christopher Boyd stood tall on the bridge of the Nemesis. "Target their largest vessels first," he ordered. "Don't let them regroup." The human ships moved in a tight formation that they had practiced for months while hiding. Each ship knew its role perfectly. The Intrepid and Valiant protected the flanks. The Defiance provided cover fire. The Relentless and Nemesis delivered the heavy blows. On the U.S. Vanguard, Commander Harlow watched the battle unfold. "It's working," he said. "They didn't expect the Shadow Fleet." Kevin Powell stood beside him, monitoring the quantum disruptor readings. "The disruptors are having an effect on the smaller ships," he reported. "Their power levels are dropping. But the larger vessels, especially that command ship, the effect is minimal." Harlow frowned. "We need to get closer to the command ship." "Too risky," Stephanie Wright argued. "We'd be destroyed before we got within range." Laura Hendricks, the lead pilot of the Vanguard's fighter squadron, stepped forward. She was small in stature, but known throughout the fleet for her courage and skill. "I can get close," she said. "My squadron can create a path through their formation." Harlow looked at her. "That gap would be extremely narrow." Laura smiled slightly. "Good thing I'm an excellent pilot then." Within minutes, Laura led her squadron of 12 fighters away from the Vanguard. Their small ships were fast and agile, darting between the massive alien vessels. "Follow my lead," Laura told her pilots. "Tight formation. Don't break ranks no matter what." The fighters flew directly toward the densest part of the alien fleet. Alien weapons fire lit up space around them, but the small human ships were hard to hit. "I see a gap," Laura called out. 3 degrees down, 20 degrees port. It's narrow but passable." The gap she'd spotted was barely wider than 2 fighters side by side. Beyond it was a relatively clear path to the alien command ship. "That's suicide," one of her pilots said. "That's our mission," Laura replied calmly. "On my mark. Now." The fighters dived into the gap, flying closer to each other than was considered safe. 2 alien ships tried to close the gap, but they were too slow. Laura's squadron shot through the opening and raced toward the command ship. Back on the Vanguard, Kevin Powell was working frantically on a modified version of the quantum disruptor. "If the standard disruptor won't affect the command ship, maybe this will," he muttered. He had created a specialized EMP device designed to target the aliens' unique communication network. It wouldn't destroy the command ship, but it might blind it temporarily. "Fighter Squadron Alpha has broken through," Danielle Rivers reported from her tactical station. "They're approaching the command ship." "Tell them to deliver Powell's package," Harlow ordered. Laura's fighters reached the command ship. It was unlike any other alien vessel they had seen. It was smaller than expected, but surrounded by a strange distortion field that made it hard to look at directly. "Deploying package," Laura said as her fighter released the modified EMP device. The other fighters did the same, surrounding the command ship with a dozen small devices. The EMPs detonated simultaneously. A wave of invisible energy washed over the command ship. Its lights flickered and went out. The distortion field collapsed. "Direct hit," Laura reported. "Their systems are down." On the Vanguard, Lieutenant Ryan Cooper approached Commander Harlow. Ryan led the ship's Special Forces team, soldiers trained for space combat and boarding actions. "Commander," he said, "with their systems down, we have a window to board that ship. We might not get another chance." Harlow hesitated only for a moment. "Assemble your team. You have 15 minutes to get in, find their control center, and disable that ship permanently." Ryan nodded. "Yes, sir." Minutes later, Ryan and his team of 6 soldiers launched in a specially designed boarding craft. They wore heavy combat suits designed for both space and internal ship operations. As they approached the darkened command ship, Ryan spoke to his team. "We don't know what we'll find in there. Stay together. Watch each other's backs. Our mission is to reach the control center and disable it. Nothing else matters." The boarding craft attached itself to the alien ship with a dull thud. Ryan activated the cutting tools that would open a path inside. "Breach in 30 seconds, he said. "Weapons ready. This is what we trained for." Lieutenant Ryan Cooper led his team through the dark corridors of the alien command ship. The inside was strange. The walls seemed to pulse with a faint blue light, and the air felt thick and difficult to breathe. "Keep oxygen levels monitored," Ryan told his team. "Something's not right with the atmosphere in here." They moved carefully, weapons ready. So far, they had encountered no resistance, which worried Ryan more than any fight would have. "Where are they?" whispered Karen Wells, his second in command. A ship this size should have hundreds of crew members. They reached a junction where 3 corridors met. Ryan checked his scanner. "That way," he said, pointing to the right. "I'm detecting a massive power source." As they moved toward the power source, the ship suddenly shuddered. The blue light in the walls pulsed brighter. Back on the Vanguard, alarms blared across the bridge. Commander Harlow looked at his science officer in alarm. "What's happening?" he demanded. Gregory Walsh stared at his readings in disbelief. "The alien ship it's activating something. I've never seen energy readings like this before." "The wrath of the abyss," Stephanie Wright said quietly. "They're using their final weapon." Outside in space, a strange distortion began to form around the alien command ship. It looked like the fabric of space itself was tearing open. Small cracks of pure darkness appeared in the vacuum, spreading outward like a spider's web. On the U.S. Nemesis, Admiral Boyd watched the phenomenon with growing horror. "What is that?" he asked his science team. "It appears to be some kind of space-time weapon," replied his chief scientist. "It's tearing apart the actual fabric of space. If it continues to grow, it could create a rift large enough to swallow the entire fleet, maybe even Earth itself." Inside the alien ship, Ryan's team finally reached the central control hub. It was a vast circular room filled with strange technology. In the center stood a pillar of swirling energy that reached from floor to ceiling. A few alien crew members turned in surprise as the humans burst in. Ryan didn't hesitate. "Take them down," he ordered. The brief firefight ended quickly. The aliens fell under the precise fire from Ryan's team. But the energy pillar continued to pulse, growing brighter by the second. "We need to shut this down," Ryan said, approaching the alien control panels. "But I can't read any of this." He contacted the Vanguard. "Commander, we've reached the control center, but we can't figure out how to shut down the weapon." On the Vanguard, Kevin Powell heard this and had a sudden realization. "Commander, I think I know what to do," he said. "The quantum disruptor. If we can get it inside that ship, right at the heart of their power core, it would create a resonance cascade." "Would that stop the weapon?" Harlow asked. Kevin nodded. "It would do more than stop it. It would implode the ship and create a temporary subspace barrier. The remaining alien ships would be cut off from reinforcements." "But our team is still on board," Stephanie pointed out. Harlow contacted Ryan. "Lieutenant, we have a solution, but you need to get your team out of there now." Ryan looked around the control room. The energy was building rapidly. "There's no time, sir. Just tell me what to do." Kevin explained his plan. The quantum disruptor would need to be placed directly into the energy pillar and activated manually. Ryan understood what this meant. He turned to his team. "All of you, get back to the boarding craft now." Karen shook her head. "We're not leaving you." "That's an order," Ryan said firmly. "Someone needs to stay and make sure this gets done right." Reluctantly, his team began to withdraw. Ryan placed his hand on Karen's shoulder. "Tell Laura. Tell her I wish we'd had that dinner I kept postponing." On the Vanguard, they watched as 5 members of the boarding team returned to their craft and detached from the alien ship. Ryan remained behind. Commander Harlow spoke to him one last time. "You're saving Earth, Lieutenant. The entire human race." "Just doing my job, sir," Ryan replied calmly. He took the quantum disruptor from his pack and approached the energy pillar. The alien ship shuddered again as the space-tearing weapon reached full power. The wrath of the abyss began to spread outward, reaching toward the human fleet. Ryan Cooper took a deep breath and pushed the quantum disruptor into the heart of the energy pillar. He activated it and stepped back. "For Earth," he whispered as the cascade reaction began. The alien command ship imploded in a blinding flash of light. Where it had been, a swirling barrier of subspace energy formed, cutting off the remaining abyss ships from the rift they had created. The wrath of the abyss collapsed in on itself and vanished.